Welcome to Zero Grade Talks, where we strip complexity back to essence and explore the intersection of human judgment, technology, and leadership. Before we begin today's episode, I want to take a moment to introduce myself, not just as the host of Zero Grade Talks, but as someone whose own path intersects deeply with the challenges we are about to explore. My name is Marian Bolous. For the past 2 decades, I have lived at the intersection of systems engineering, DevOps, product development, and responsible AI. My work has taken me through the worlds of cybersecurity, regulated industries, mental health technology, and AI platform design. And what I have learned is this: AI is only as good as the integrity of the people, processes, and guardrails behind it. Like many of you, I've seen how technical decisions ripple into human outcomes. I've watched teams ship features without thinking about failure modes. And I have had to design AI systems where ethics, governance, and human well-being aren't optional, they are the foundation. It's this mix, technology, responsibility, human impact, that made me want to create this podcast, which is why today's conversation is meaningful to me personally. My guest, Dushyant Singh, works in a space I deeply respect: model risk management, financial services, AI governance, regulatory expectations, and the discipline required to put intelligence into production responsibly. Our worlds intersect in the foundational belief that AI is not a magic trick. It's an engineering discipline with real consequences. Dushyant approaches this with clarity, humanity, and precision. I approach it from the other end, from the lenses of DevOps, AI enablement, mental health, and product design. Together, this creates a conversation that bridges model risk and human risk, regulation and real-world intelligence, technical rigor, and value-driven leadership. This episode is not about doom or hype. It's about wisdom and what it takes to build intelligence that deserves our trust. So with that, let's step into conversation that matters: models, mindsets, and the human responsibility behind AI. In every episode, we try to uncover not just how AI transforms systems, but how it transforms people. Today's conversation goes straight to the heart of something that affects every financial institution, every AI practitioner, every regulator, and frankly, every citizen. How do we build intelligence that we can trust when it increasingly runs the world? And there is no one better to explore this with than today's guest. Our guest today is Dushyant Singh, a trusted voice in financial services, model risk management, MLOps, and AI regulatory strategy. With deep expertise across SR 117, OCC expectations, model validation, and enterprise AI frameworks, Dushyant works at the intersection of risk and innovation, regulation and intelligence, technical rigor, and human responsibility. He has helped institutions build AI centers of excellence, strengthen their model governance pipelines, and rethink how risk should be owned, not feared. What stands out about Dushyant is not just his technical mastery, it's the way he speaks about risk with humanity and clarity. Someone who sees models not as equations, but as systems that affect real people. And today, he helps us explore the deeper questions. What does intelligence mean? What does responsibility mean? And how do we build systems that deserve our trust? Before we dive into the frameworks and regulations, take us back. When did you first realize risk work wasn't about numbers, it was about people?
Thanks, Marian, for having me. Thanks for the opportunity. I have enjoyed various facets of my career. I have done a lot of soul digging, I would say, in terms of what I need to pursue next, as I kept learning and unlearning new stuff over the last 2 decades working across different domains. The requirements have evolved very quickly. So, to answer to your question, like when did I first realize? I started my career in financial services and then I played a lot of different roles across different teams. But one of the reasons I wanted to be in data science and machine learning was I wanted to understand how these mathematical, statistical approaches are actually impacting the end customers. So I would say, with that in mind, every time you build a model, you want to make sure there is a strategy aligned with that model. That strategy is not something that is harming the people in any way, right? There's always a business side of the decision making, but then there's always the human side,
Oh,
because that's what the balance needs to be. As a data scientist, as a machine learning model developer, there are many roles you can say. You do not have much say except like what you bring to the table in terms of data, your machine learning expertise, and stuff like that. But as a developer, you still need to keep that in mind. So there are a couple of
yes.
examples that I would like to quote. This was from my early days when I did not have a credit score. But you're working for a bank and you realize that there's a strategy of the bank that does not work for its own employees.
Mm,
So that's when, like while you're inside the office building, you made a strategy that when that doesn't work for you, when you come back home and you see none of the parameters that you decided were good for a good borrower work for you. So I think that's a direct implication, wherein the bank has a strategy which is primarily driven by its own interests to cover its losses and stuff like those, but then the human side is missing. I would like to give you another example wherein there was this bank that I was working for. Mostly, I have worked most of my life as a consultant. So that gives me a good coverage in terms of how many different size of banks, what their customer set is. I think that gives me a good exposure in that regard. So there was this particular community bank it was my client, and they had a very focused set of customers. Hispanic, mostly, very trustworthy. Most of the loan officers were from this community. So they were mostly relationship driven versus
yeah,
model
I
driven.
understand.
So if you try to project your model outcomes onto this community, you will lose business very fast.
Okay.
So they had this policy of taking that model outcomes with a pinch of salt, but also making sure none of their customers get impacted by the historical data that they have been using, or any other regulatory needs that would come into that decision mix. So I think with that, they still maintained a good default rate, like an acceptable default rate. Most people would not believe it, but the reason that worked for them was that relationship was built on trust with loan officers, trust with the bank, and less based on the model driven decision. So I'm just trying to contrast two scenarios where one situation, the bank had policies which did not work for their own employees, but in other situation, a bank which was driven by community and relationship, they did use models, but they overlaid it with their own sense as well.
That sounds really interesting, insightful in the terms of like balancing between the people involved or the roles involved with
Yeah.
the model and the users that the model needs is serving
Yeah.
and the audience that are using the model. Am I right? Did I
Yes.
get this right?
You're absolutely right. I think while we are in this world which has models, data, technology, there is this human connection, that the last mile connectivity, I would say, that must be taken into calculations as well. That is the missing piece of the calculation that gives you the most error lot of time.
I see. So I see that the pressure was actually high building those models. And let me ask you, what values held it steady and held you steady through building those models?
So, when you build any of these models, I think something that I always like to keep in mind, and which is, I think most banks now actually care for a lot, and then primarily driven by regulations as well, is if you are impacting, like if you are a chief credit officer, I think the first thing you would want to ask is, if I make this decision today, how many of my own loan officers would not get the loan? Or let's say if there's a mortgage, how many, if I due to some impact, I make a decision due to which my loan officer's own house is going to foreclosure. So, do I have to make those decisions, or maybe there is something else that I can do? Is there an alternative? So, instead of always trying to be right, but business versus models and data, I think you need to bring in some alternate perspective as well, and that might solve the problem. There's no right or wrong here, but there's always a way out that can help. And I have seen a lot of my clients very intelligently asking those questions all the time, because it's not
Yes.
just about regulations or data all the time. It's about making those decisions that go a long way.
Understood. Absolutely. What I love about this is how technical work becomes a human philosophy. That's something many leaders struggle to articulate, to be honest. You've seen the real world effects of model failure, lending decisions, customer journeys, credit fairness. Can you share a moment when a model's outcome affected actual people and you felt the weight of that?
That's a great question. And that has happened quite a few different times in how it could have been a model or maybe some other kind of a
Yeah.
platform that you're building. It could be as less impactful as like a marketing model, which is just about sending it out to the most people who are like a propensity model, who are most likely to purchase or something, versus actual credit decisioning model, which is very impactful.
Understood.
So I have seen failures on both front, but I think real world example that I can still remember very clearly is I was just talking about finding alternate situations, but in credit decisioning in last 5 to 6 years, probably before that, leaders have been always thinking about what alternative data can I use to make impactful decisions. Right. So I'll give you an example. This was a model that we are building for student loans, approving or denying student loans. And then we had built a good model that was working. But then the idea was, can we find out some new alternate sources of data that could help the business make better decisions, right? So at a high level, this is your goal. Can we make a better decision for the business, and then be more proactive in identifying who are the borrowers that are most likely to default, right? That's mostly, in most cases, when you're building a model, that's your objective. But what happens is, we soon realized once the model was built that some of these variables that you had included, instead of benefiting the customers in some way, they are more harmful to customers, because there are customers who genuinely are qualified for some sort of a credit, but just because you have included a variable and they are
Ah,
not aware of it in any way that this would be held against them, they are denied credit for something very as like silly as, I would say, some sort of a missed utility bill in the past, right? So they actually probably need a personal loan for a genuine reason, but they missed on a $50 payment for a utility bill. So I think those decisions are more ethical, and than just having a including more data to be more thoughtful about how you build a model. So there is this always that balance between innovation and ethics. Innovation hat would say include more data, get more granular information, but then there's the other side which will tell you this is not helpful, this is not going to impact you. Because end of the day, banks are there to serve the customers. It might appear banks are there to serve their own business, which is true,
yes,
but you don't survive if your customers lose trust.
definitely.
So
Definitely.
yeah, that is a real world effect that I have observed. And then as a data scientist, you need to keep that in mind, the strategists.
I like the term data strategist. So, what still worries you the most when you look at how some teams rush models to production?
Something like this. So one of the things, so the reason I worked as a data scientist or building models on the or model developer, there's so many terms, for almost 15 years. But then I realized I think I should move on to model validation, or maybe the other side of the spectrum. And primarily because I found that a lot of the things that you build are not connected because you need to question yourself a lot more on why you are building this. What is the impact? There are a lot of other questions beyond just the statistical validity of the model, right? So most people still think MRM as a boring exercise, which is about checking the boxes on the model performance, and then you are done. Versus the right way to look at MRM is, does this cause harm or impact to the end customers? And are we actually analyzing this model or challenging this model in the right business context? One of the things I would like to say is, if you talk to more seasoned bankers, and if you are a data scientist or anybody with a statistical quant background, they will say, hey, first understand my business before you wear your statistical hat. So that understand my business is a very key philosophy. I go to a bank and as a consultant, but I need to know enough about the bank. You need to understand the business, and MRM does that job of challenging the models in a way that is beyond statistical checkboxes.
Understood. Yeah. So we do usually have the impression that all banks are the same, that all banks are the same, and they are just financial institutions. So some of the differences between banks, would you be generous enough to share some with us?
Yeah, so not every bank is same, in the sense that as your operations grow, as your number of customers grow, you need to balance innovation, you need to balance technology, you need to balance that relationship aspect of whole community size banks, right? And then as you grow in sizes, the regulatory demand on you also increases at the same time. I think all of those things kind of drive how your new age banks are shaping up. So that's why, like, there's a lot of, I'll give you a quick example. People talk about, hey, we need to adopt AI, or there's this fear of missing out. Hey, there's so much out there in terms of AI. We are still lagging behind. What do we do? I think the first question really is to ask yourself, do you really need AI? What is your business strategy that you think AI would fit well into that? What are you trying to achieve? Because the reason I say that is every bank is different. They are on a different growth path at some, and like depending on their size. So you are trying to solve a problem. First, you need to identify what is that problem in your journey, at what point you are. And based on that, you need to get that AI or whatever you think will solve the problem. It may or may not be AI. So that's why, to answer your question, all these banks are very different, all driven by where they are, the customer base, what they focus on. So I worked with large banks. I worked with banks like which are 100 million as well, which have like they maintain everything on their Excel file as well. They load the entire portfolio in an Excel file. So very differently driven. They have different requirements in terms of regulatory needs, in terms of resources they have. So those are some of the things that to keep in mind as you evaluate banks.
So behind every model, like you just said, there is a bank's personality, and also there is a human story. And I feel you make that very clear. So for those who don't live and breathe SR 11.7 and OCC compliance, can you bring us into the room?
Yeah, they are, I would say, oftentimes very misunderstood topics. At a very high level, SR 11.7 is something that if you were like, for example, when you were starting your career, a lot of your seniors and your managers would tell you some of the best practices. Like, for example, when I was a model developer early on in my career, my managers would tell me, do this is the best practice, do that, don't do this versus that, right? So over a period of time, I realized after the the Great Recession, 2007, 2008, all of these best practices actually were coded and called SR 11.7. If you read them, that's what you'll realize. Hey, you need to be able to have reproducible results. Like the results should be working on your laptop and it should be working in production just the same similar way. So what do you do to ensure all that? How do you make sure your data is consistent and accurate and complete? Things like those. As a data scientist, you are making sure all along the way that you are able to answer all these questions. So what SR 11.7 does for you is actually has provided you a guiding light so to speak. So everybody's on the same page. Now, how you interpret that guiding light in the context of your bank is something for you to decide or define for yourself. You may be a small bank, you may not have all the resources, but conceptually and ethically, are you making the right decisions in terms of model development, upkeep of the model, maintenance, monitoring of the model, all of that, right? Are you doing the
Yes.
right things or not? So you can decide it for yourself based on the resources that you have. But ultimately, that's what you are being told to do as part of this SR 11.7 guidance.
Understood. This really brings a lot of clarity to our audience. What happens when a company underestimates regulatory expectations?
Oh, there's definitely disaster. So in short, so I'll give you like there are a couple of examples that I have in my mind, but I'll use this. So again, my background is credit, so you will see me giving more examples from credit side, but yeah, I'll go with one of those. So let's say, so I've been in a lot of these, like I've been a consultant working with regulators, answering, like working alongside audit teams that are answerable to audit regulators as well. So answering questions on behalf of bank or on behalf of the auditors to the regulators. And a lot of time that there are questions about, okay, you have a great model, it looks perfect, all the statistical assumptions, the model assumptions, everything looks fine on paper, but there's a problem. Your data is not diverse enough. So I think that I have heard that quite a few times, because a
Yeah.
lot of these smaller banks do not have data that is, while they might have data that represents their population or their customer base very well, but it may not be representative of all the diversity out there and what can happen in the future and stuff like that. So I've heard that from regulators all the time, and then we have been asked, as in, how did you assess the impact of not having enough data, and what other tests did you perform to make yourself comfortable? So now there's a hard question to answer, and that's why I say, if your models could be completely stalled, they may never see the light of the day if you're not able to answer these questions, right? So that's one thing about data that can be questioned. In another scenario, a regulator can simply ask that, hey, there's another kind of modeling or the loss forecasting that banks do for their reserve calculation. It's a guidance called CSIL, and there's the two parts to that whole calculation. One is the quantitative part, the other is the qualitative part. Quantitative is what the
Yeah.
model would give you, but then there is all sort of overlays that the management can decide about what would happen in future, and it's management's. So you might be challenged for not having comprehensive enough overlays that might protect your bank. So,
Understood.
which means you're not putting enough money in reserve, and that might be challenged. I just want to give a quick background on more reserves mean less amount available to bank for lending if you put more amount in reserves, right? So bank normally do not like putting more in reserves, and that's why that's the tussle there, or not the tussle, but the balance that you have to make versus growth, which is lending for banks, versus keeping things in reserve, which is regulation demand. So they might challenge, hey, you did not assess the future well, that's why you are keeping less amount in the reserve, but the objective of not keeping enough amount in the reserves could be completely driven by growth, right? So yeah, so I think those are the things. If you do not, your regulators have all the powers to question this and stall your progress.
I see. That's amazing, amazing insights. I mean, what internal tensions do leaders face? I am just thinking about balancing innovation and regulatory pressure.
The whole point is, as a business line leader, you are
Yes.
looking to grow your business.
Yes.
But then there's the other side of whole regulatory needs that you also need to work with. One of the arguments that banks normally use, I have seen clients use, is, hey, I'm not that big to comply with almost every regulation under the sun. I can probably live with only these 3 or these 4, not everything. Something like that. I wouldn't say they try to cut corners there, but they are just being prudent there. As in, If you can always assume all the restrictions in the world and never want to grow, or
Absolutely.
you can see how to balance that, right? So another
Absolutely.
example could be like as a data scientist, or maybe now this is Gen AI world. People don't understand AI, but they are on to Gen AI now, and they want to adopt Gen AI, and you want to have a best model that is out there predicting outcomes for your customers or the responses. But you can simply lose trust very quickly with your customers if you have not done it right. So
Understood.
let's say a simple example could be, let's say you are trying to assist frontline risk managers with some sort of an automation. Automation doesn't work. Like, it works very well when somebody built it, but
Yeah.
as you put it in production, the performance drops and the trust quickly breaks with the frontline. Then they don't want to use it anymore. That's the tussle there is going on. Like, you want to do something, but when it comes to real world, you have to comply with all the regulations, which might mean performance drops and shutdown.
Understood. Yeah, absolutely. It's striking how regulation is not just about rules. It's
Yes.
about alignment and courage. When you look at the explosion of AI adoption, what's the biggest misconception about AI validation and MLOps in financial services?
That's again a great question, and a topic close to my heart. I would say there are actually two sides to MLOps as it applies to model, uh, like validation. So, first one is the original intention of model ops, which was to be able to
Understood.
train model faster as the data is changing faster in the background, something Amazon needs. Amazons of the world needs, right? Because they have this recommendation engine and the customers are making new decisions very quickly. That data has to be fed back into the system. New model have to be trained so that as a customer on Amazon website, you are seeing the most relevant and up-to-date recommendations for you to buy. I think that's the primary motivation behind having a model ops system. Now,
Hmm.
if you apply this concept to financial services, it helps you in a different way, which is MRM. Because MRM asks for a lot of these technology advances at the same time. Like, I want to know, how did you train your model? What data was used to train the model? Right? Can you reproduce the results? Something that I was talking about SR 11.7. So technology today, as in the form of model ops or MLOps platforms, actually help you accomplish a lot from SR 11.7 requirement perspective. So
Hmm.
it fits well with financial services, right? But the thing that is missing is, as a bank, you can buy the most sophisticated MLOps platform out there in the market. You can design the nice dashboard. You can have like perfect CI/CD and everything that comes with MLOps. But what is missing is, if you have those like 100 metrics on a nice dashboard, out of those 50 are showing red. But if a regulator comes and asks you, how does this impact the customer? These 50 metrics showing red.
Okay.
And if you cannot answer that, then you're doomed, because because you adopted one side of MLOps, which was a technology retraining, dashboarding, so to
Hmm.
support your MRM exercises like reproducibility and stuff like that, data, feature engineering, all that. But you missed the piece, as in, what does this mean for your business?
Hmm.
Right. So I think that's still the connection somebody needs to make. So who makes that connection?
Understood.
Makes that connection in the bank, right? Most of the time, data engineer or engineering teams don't make that connection. They just build the system for you. They know why this metric exists or who came up with this metric. Data scientists can tell you, hey, I need model drift. I need to track my model monitoring in this way, right? So everybody is siloed. They know their own metrics. Is a win for them.
Hmm.
But somebody needs to know the real impact of those metrics. I think that's the biggest misconception about MLOps or AI ops or AI validation adoption. It's not about just adopting a system. It's breaking that mental silos of different roles. I talked about data science, engineering, business. Some people need to come together to understand why you built that system, because it's an adoption from a different industry originally.
Understood. So, who do you think Dushyant needs to be responsible for those matrices?
So, great question. So I think that's where there are two conflated terms that are often used: AI governance and AI risk management. If
Yes,
you ask most people in the industry what that means, there would be a lot of different answers. The answer for that, like AI governance is oversight. If you think about it, like literally, AI risk management is how you run the system, daily checks and balances. So I think it's the role of a proper AI governance to see everything that you have set up is working well, which is not the job of one person. So it is a committee that needs to take care of system that you have built, review it, make changes as it's needed, right? So a short answer is not one person's job, but probably you need a committee to,
understood. Yeah,
because AI is expensive, not just when you get started with it. It's something that you need to spend more
correct,
and more to maintain it.
correct.
It's not a one-time effort.
Yeah, correct. I mean, from where we sit, we just see computation powers, we see models being built, data, all of this, but we don't imagine all the responsibility and the
Yes,
lives affected and the institutional liability. Needless to mention the job roles that need to be
yes.
available and expertise in order to build responsible systems. So, who needs to be sitting on that committee?
Okay. So almost, I would say almost everyone. So now what I mean is you need to have your chief risk officers, because there are many roles and they are again conflicted: your chief AI officer, chief
Yes.
data officer, like whoever has a stake in how these decisions are. If you feel your CFO who invested in all this and he wants to see the ROI, he needs to be
Yes.
on the committee. And simply put, like whoever feels it's theirs, they are the stakeholders. And the reason I said almost everyone is if you are interested to know the ROI and how it is progressing, or you're interested in knowing what is the impact, then the business officer who commissioned the project, the model, they need to know it. The person who built it, chief AI officer, and his team, his or her team, they need to be on the committee for the reason on what changes need to be made. So yeah, it's a team game.
Understood. So, from that team game, what breaks first inside an organization when they don't have an AI center of excellence, or let's say they have an AI center of excellence, but they're not realizing their plans? Is it the culture, the data, the trust, the models?
Trust, culture, model, data, all those are great terms you hear interchangeably. But I think that breaks first is trust. And the reason I say that is I still remember from like almost from my 2010 or 9 experience that I when I first built a logistic regression model. And I was working with a team who was supposed, sales team, which was supposed to use the outcome of those models. Have been on the team doing their job for almost 10, 15, 20 years, let's say, selling something. And I come up with my model, hey, say, rely on my model outcome to reach out to your customer versus your own knowledge. If my model outcome doesn't match their knowledge, they will never trust me with my model ever again.
Correct.
Right. So that was almost my first job or first role as a data scientist back then. So I have kept that learning in mind since then. Build trust with your outcomes, that whatever you're building.
Yes.
Everything else, like the culture will follow. Meaning, I cannot be talking in a data scientist language like today's world. There are so many new terms that come out every day: RAG, AI, context engineering, whatnot, right? So business people don't understand all this. Everybody needs to have the same language to build their trust.
Yes.
If somebody's trust is broken and you keep throwing technical jargon, it's going to break further down.
Yes.
Right? So that clearly means dishonesty in my mind. When I'm looking for an answer and you're not giving me the answer that helps me, it means dishonest answer in simple sense, right?
Yeah.
So you're not creating a culture there. And then you have data, and model comes last. It could have solved many things, but it did not solve anything because the foundation was not there.
Understood.
So model always comes last in my mind.
If you could redesign the future of AI governance from scratch, what would the new standard look like?
I've seen models built in 2012 or 13, and they were good until 2018-19 for that long. The reason banks consumers did not change their behavior a lot. Models that were trained on that data did not become stale for very long. And so the same algorithm could be used.
Yes.
Now, I would say in last 5 years, consumer behavior and all other everything around any business is changing so fast that you need constant feed a loop that is feeding your model. I think MLOps that's why comes into picture very clearly here. I think from a governance perspective, one thing everybody needs to probably think about is it's not a one-time model development exercise that you're finished. You need to have a constant flow of the new data that is getting generated and the new behaviors that your model is driving to be fed back into the model training as quickly as you can. So, for example, very quickly, just for the audience purpose, what I mean here is when, let's say, you build a model to make credit decisions, you need to know what happened to those customers after, let's say, you gave a decision for loan, approve a loan. The loans were booked or they were defaulted. What happened to those customers 90 days after? Did they still paying? So you need to have all that information of your current decision and be fed back into the model because how the economy is changing, everything is changing. That model behavior may not be consistent.
Understood.
So I think that's one big part on how things are changing now in terms of data and technology has to be leveraged to for banks or any other business to be on top of how they're using AI or machine learning or any other technique. So I think that should become the centerpiece of any AI governance, like constant monitoring, but also knowing what to do when anything breaks quickly.
This is the kind of perspective that will shape the next decade of responsible AI. And in high pressure environments, messy data, tight regulatory deadlines, massive expectations, what does good leadership look like?
Well, I have learned from a lot of great leaders, so I'm still learning. But some of the things that I have constantly observed across almost any client or any great leader in this scenario is be able to have your ear close to the ground. What I mean by that is be able to understand the pulse, see what everyone in the room is talking about. Because a lot of time you fail to build a good model or fail to make a good credit strategy or any other kind of business strategy driven by AI and data because you built your strategy, your model, or data, everything in silo. So I think keep listening, reevaluating, be open to criticism. One thing that I have read a lot is shelf life of a chief data officer or chief AI officer is very short in any business. It's because priorities keep changing so fast. Like something that you built very close to your heart and you're not willing to move on and make amends as necessary, then you soon become irrelevant, right? As a person who's driving the change. So always willing to listen almost anyone in the room and make amends as necessary.
That's amazing. What did you personally have to unlearn to lead better in this space?
I have unlearned a lot.
All of
This
us, I think
right. So I started my career as a data engineer.
yes.
And within 2 years, I switched to data scientist. Then from data science, I moved on to validating models, MRM, and governance and all that. So, and there was a reason for all these changes because I wanted to be, as a data engineer, I did not know why I am building this data stack. So I wanted to know how this will be used. So I moved on to data science where you were building models and then trying to at least get closer to the end consumer, customer, whoever is attached to the business, right? Then I realized, okay, after building so many models over the years, more than a decade, I realized most of these models do not go anywhere because they are not able to answer the right questions. Validation, which is very important, and only then these would see the light of the day. So I wanted to be able to question the models that are being built and be able to critique. I know how these models are built because I built it myself. So there is two sides to it. One, you need to have empathy for the model developers as well, because not everything they do is without knowledge. But then there's the other side also that needs to make the connection to the business. That's why I was like, MRM is not about just checkboxes. You don't necessarily need to have a 500-page validation document. What the validation document should talk about why this model is best fit for your business. I think that's what it should answer instead of saying it checked everything under the regulatory requirement box. That's a secondary outcome.
Yeah.
So building the best model would save my life.
Yes.
Then I had to unlearn that building the best model from accuracy perspective is not going to save my life.
Yes.
It's actually being able to critique the models that are being built in the right spirit
Yes.
would help me sleep better in night. So I
That's
think that's what I've learned, something new, and completely unlearned what I learned as a data scientist.
that's the kind of honesty rarely speak out loud.
Thank
And
you.
it's what we need most, to be honest, in today's the fast developing technology market and landscape. It's really, the pace is so fast for us to make sure that we as humans are always safe with it.
Yeah.
If a startup's model suddenly begins scaling fast, what's the first risk control they must put in place?
So this is a constant dilemma, resource problem, because one of the things that startups struggle with is resource. So they try to solve everything using technology. There is a point where they have to bring in that human in the loop element. And sooner they bring it, after a certain size they achieve, I think it is going to benefit them. Let's say you have a model that detects fraud, right, in the system. And then you have some false positives in your system that are constantly showing up after the volume has increased. It could be a payment, startup, or fintech, or credit anywhere. After a certain size of your false positive, you need to put a human in the loop and see what is causing this false positives. Or in other case, like a credit risk, you need to know if you're denying loan to someone which is at the most bottommost, what is the reason for the model to deny these loans? Or what the other case was false positives in a fraud case. Sooner you start realizing what the model is missing out as a team, as a startup, you are going to be able to scale more responsibly instead of just focusing on engineering side of it, which is, hey, I need to be able to, I have today 10,000 customers, tomorrow it would be 1 million or whatever, right? I need to focus on engineering to solve the volume problem, but it's not about the volume problem here. It's before you reach 1 million, you need to be able to know exactly how you solve the scaling. The scaling is about human here. It's not about engineering. I think that would be something that I'll keep in mind as a startup.
Understood. So, what do regulators often misunderstand about MLOps that they need to grasp in 2026 and beyond?
MLOps is more an internal construct for. So as long as you are able to provide everything that our typical regulator requires, I think they should be okay. In 2026 or beyond, things are going to change very fast, and there would be newer concepts, newer dashboards, newer metrics, new technology. For example, last 2 years, Gen AI, people are still struggling to define how to evaluate Gen AI the best in their business context, right? And the bank people who are building this have not figured it out fully. How will regulators know everything? While technology is helping, development is growing faster than adoption. So I think that's something to keep in mind from a regulatory perspective. And also, as you build something, how do you keep it honest and simple and open?
And for professionals, what's one habit or mindset that transformed your career?
I'm just very curious because this field is growing so fast. I want to be able to know why we are doing something in this space and how important and critical is this to answer the business outcome. Whether it requires model development, model validation, building a technology framework around it, or a AI governance framework around it. I think all those things interest me because, like I said, 10 years back, things were moving very slow. So you could have spent your entire career in one space. But unless here you appreciate everybody who's coming together in a room to build a useful product, it's hard to comment, right? So that's what drives my interest, and keep learning new stuff and unlearning your old something that I said. Building the best model is not something I chase now.
Understood.
And
This is gold.
even in engineering, if you are an engineer, I would say just making sure that this model runs in a certain environment is not enough.
Yes.
So be open to unlearn and see what's out there, why we need it, and how is it relevant in today's context is important.
This is gold. Clear, practical, grounded, exactly what our audience need. And when you think about your career, the models, systems, people, what impact do you hope your work leaves 10 years from now?
I think I would want to build something that benefits the domain that I work in currently, which is financial services. So I'm trying right now, my focus is all on community banks, mid-sized bank, credit unions, and help them in adopting this new age technology. I wouldn't use the word AI, but new age technology in a more responsible way. I think the end customers or people like us, everybody benefits from this eventually. I think that's something I like to build.
That sounds amazing, Dushyant, and very inspiring. I also would like to build something that serves people.
Yeah.
For a long time, and it benefits everyone. So, for someone feeling overwhelmed by the pace of AI, what would you say to them today?
So I think it's a very fast-paced world. One thing for sure is you cannot be an expert now in anything, given how quickly things are changing. And almost there is a new model or new technology out there. Definitely, it puts a lot of stress on you to be up to date. But I would like something that I'm trying to do. Maybe it would help others. Is choose your niche, what you want to do, where you want to make that impact, and then see if you can bring all that energy, information, knowledge to solve that problem. It could be your personal problem, it could be problem for the community. I think that's where you will make the most impact in my mind. Trying to learn everything, collecting certificates do not help anyone. So
Yes, definitely.
I would say learn with a purpose, and I'm trying to do that, and hopefully I'm able to make an impact. That's where I am focusing on right now, and I would urge everybody to just keep eyes open for opportunity. It's like I would say that it's such a brilliant time to be alive. There are so many things you can do now that you could not do 5 years ago with how the technology has progressed. So I would say solve the problem you always wanted to solve.
Definitely solve the problem that you've always wanted to solve.
You have so many resources now.
Yes, correct. We do have many resources that we didn't have before.
Yes.
I think I'm very thankful for that. If you've encountered a problem in your life, it should inspire you to
Yes.
solve it for the next generations, you know?
Yes.
Dushyant, thank you. This is one of the clearest, most human conversations on model risk and AI responsibility we've had so far. Your insights will stick with us and with every builder, regulator, and innovator listening to this podcast. Thank you so much for your time today and for being with us on Zero Great Talks.
Thank you, Marian. This was such a pleasure talking to you, and I look
Same.
forward to continued collaboration in future.
Thank you.